The recent tragedy of Mizuki and the feedback I got surrounding her has got me wondering, do standard units have to suck? Let's talk about it. My name is Juice, and let's get into it. So, I'm of the personal opinion that being a standard character doesn't automatically mean that you have to be really, really bad. Now granted, we do have Chi-Chi, and that's because I believe that every gacha game likes to have one character that's really garbage to lose the 50-50 to put some extra salt on the wound. You know, like Yanqing from Honkai Star Rail or Nekomata from ZZZ. And then you also have Ling Yang from Wuthering Waves. So we already have that base covered. And every other standard character, I would say, is at the very least usable and competent. Granted, Dia was not good on release, she was equally as bad as Mizuki on release, and she only really came into the meta over time, and it's very, very likely that Mizuki herself is going to be a similar case to Dia, where on release, we're all gonna trash on her, and then eventually she'll find some use cases. Never necessarily being at the top of a meta, but still being a viable choice. And besides, she'll be a viable choice on day one. Her issue is more so at 4 stars, literal Animo 4 stars, could perform very similarly to her. But I don't really think being a standard unit is a reason to be a bad character. I don't really think that explains the thought process behind making Mizuki a terrible unit, because Tainari was really good. He's a really, really good spread DPS if you're interested in playing that archetype. I would say that people regard him quite highly, and there are many people that believe him to be one of the best standard characters. He's strong, he is really strong. Now, I personally think that Jean is the best standard character, because she's an amazing versatile support, especially after the release of our beloved Lady Farina. So those two are really decent units. Then you take a look at Diluc. Now, to be fair, for the longest time, he wasn't really that good. However, he recently got saved by Xianyun, and I think that it's been long enough since we've gotten her for me to say that he qualifies as a good standard and that Mizuki can't really fall on being standard as an excuse for being bad. Because Xianyun came out in 4.4, we're going into patch 4.5. It'll have been a whole year since her initial release. Which, that's a whole can of worms on its own. I can't believe that she has not gotten a rerun yet. I've been waiting for it because I really want to make videos on that character. I love Xianyun, but okay, she'll be around eventually, I hope. But anyways, now, to be fair, that could just further the argument that Mizuki is eventually going to become good, and that she's just going to be mid on her release banner. But then we have to take a look at Dia, who was famously horrible on release, but then she ended up becoming pretty decent over time. She never rose up to become some meta legend, but during not launch, she's seen her fair share of buffs, and now you can comfortably use her in teams without her feeling super bad. Mona's one that was really good at the beginning, but sort of fell off over time. She used to be amazing in freeze teams, especially Ayaka freeze teams, but because those aren't as relevant as they used to be, she's kinda fallen off. Not to mention how you can just use Kokomi these days in most of the places where you would have used Mona, and get a much comfier experience. And if you want damage bonus percent buffing, then just turn your eyes to our beloved Lady Farina. So Mona's not great, she's very situational, but she's not total garbage. I would still say that she's competent at the very worst. Keqing's a character that was, oh boy, like she was bad before. She was really, really bad before. So bad to the point where there were people using physical builds on her because they were competitive with her electro builds. That's not a good thing. Like, she was terrible pre-Dendro, the butt of every joke. However, Dendro came out and she became a very good Fischl driver, so she did eventually get buffs over time as well, around 2 years or so after she got added to the game, because she was around since launch. So a common trend that I'm noticing here is that a lot of the older standard characters, they used to suck, but they eventually became good, whether by intention or not. Tainari was good, and then Dia was pretty horrible on release. She was infamous for being horrible on release, but now she's fine. But I would say that in this modern Genshin day and age, where we have so many potential Animo drivers or Animo units that can slot into taser teams, Mizuki should still be able to provide something unique that is equivalent to the value of what the others provide. Swirl buffing on its own is a cool gimmick, but it's a shame that it can't really outweigh what the others are able to provide on their own. Even Chi-Chi has a team in Physical Clorand. Every single character on the standard banner has at least a couple of teams that they are solid in. Now granted, that's doing a disservice to Mizuki because she is still decent in Taser, and once you get a couple of copies of her, then she does in fact become quite competitive. So it's mostly just a C0 issue, and because standard characters, you get copies of them over time, it's fair enough that she was designed around her C1 to 2. However, I still don't really like what that means, because to me, every 5-star character, including standard units, should have a baseline level of competence at C0. They shouldn't have to rely on constellations in order to fully complete their kit. Now, the thing is, I think everyone can agree with that, but Hoyoverse is going to do it anyway. They've done it for limited 5 stars, and I don't see why they wouldn't do it for standard 5 stars as well, when it actually makes more logical sense to do so. But once again, when you take a look at all of the old standard roster, constellations aren't really required for any of them. Now granted, you really want C1 Dia if you're trying to make her do damage, but otherwise, you can just use her as an off-field power support just fine down at C0, and all of the other standard characters, even if they do get a nice little boost out of having their constellations, they are far from required. Kaching's constellation lineup is decent enough, but you really don't need it in order for her to be a competent visual driver. If you ask me, I think that Jean has the best constellation design out of all of the standard characters, and that's because at C0, she will absolutely fulfill the role that you want her to. That being a fanfare generator, being able to offer 4VV shred, and Sunfire if that's what you're going for. However, for the acquisition of copies of her over time, you get other nice little boosts. Nothing necessary per se, but still nice boosts, such as C2 providing attack speed, C4 being really good for Animo DPS teams, and then C6 providing just more survivability on the whole, really doubling down on what the core of her kit is supposed to be. But she's still good at C0. So I have this personal expectation that every new 5-star character, even if they're standard, should be good down at C0. They did a really good job with Tainari, for instance. He really felt complete down at C0, and his constellations are all fine and dandy, but you will absolutely get the spread DPS experience out of him when you've only got a single copy. Now, it could be the case that Hoyoverse paid special attention to him because they wanted the first Dendro 5-star on banners to be a good one. But the thing is, if you even think back to when a lot of these standard characters were not very good, you still didn't need constellations to make them good. It definitely helped for sure, but it was far from a necessity. I will say I'm being a little bit dramatic here, because it's not like her kit itself is clunky or flawed without constellations, it's more so just that her performance is underwhelming without constellations. And she only really wants C1 Plus to start feeling good. Like, that's not that big of a deal, that's not really a tall ask to be fair. I still don't love that she's not going to be amazing right out of the box at C0, but considering that she's free from the yearly selector, okay, at least I can see where the idea is coming from, and I might be exaggerating a bit. Because that's actually another point that I would like to raise in regards to all of this. Mizuki is the first standard that's being designed with them being free in the future being kept in mind. Every single year, we're going to get a standard character for free from the yearly selector that we can choose ourselves. So now Hoyoverse is aware that a lot of people are going to be waiting for that point in time where they can go and pick up the standard that they want. So now every single standard character that they make is essentially a free character. Before, the incentive to pull on them would have been, oh, I might not lose the 50-50 to them, I might never get them on the standard banner, I would rather just get them now, and if I get copies of them down the line, that's fine because I like the character enough to accept that fact. You definitely would have seen a whole lot of that with Tainari because he was Dendro. That was interesting at the time, really interesting at the time because it was an entirely new element after the game had already been out for a couple of years, so people were excited to give that a go. And to be fair, giving limited banners to standard characters has pretty much never went well sales-wise. Kaching's banner, that did terribly, and I don't really know how Dia's banner did. Let me know how that did, I really wouldn't know. I'm going to make the assumption that Tainari did the best out of them because it was a new region release at the time and a brand new element. But either way, that incentive of I want them now instead of waiting later still remained because there was no guarantee that you could get them later. Nowadays, there is a very, very firm guarantee. And this year, I'm sure that a lot of people that have been playing for a long time but have gotten all the standards that they want, they've got all the constellations on all the standards that they play, or at least enough that they're satisfied with, they're going to be picking up Mizuki because she's a new character, which is most likely why she wants C1 Plus in order to be competitive with Sucrose in her best installed teams. To be fair, someone did point this out to me, that Sucrose is a really good 4-star, so it's not like some mediocre competition here. Sucrose is a good unit. However, because she's such a widely owned 4-star, that still does really negate Mizuki's value, until you can acquire some extra copies of her, which I believe is why they're trying to make her feel so mediocre down at C0, so that they can kind of keep that incentive, that feeling of, if I pull for C0 now, that way I can go and get C1 whenever it's free later on, and then she's going to be better than my Sucrose in our best in slot teams. So it's actually quite interesting now that I've realized that. And another thing is that I don't really see the incentive to make a standard character this bad, because losing the 50-50 is already enough of a sad experience, if you will. If someone's been saving months for a character and they don't get the character, that in of itself is already a pretty upsetting experience. I'd say it's decent if we can get at least a B tier character as compensation for that. Chi-Chi already exists as the worst possible thing that can happen to you when pulling for a limited character. Something else interesting that was brought up to me is that they might be making Mizuki so that they can make an Inazuma Chronicled Wish, which I can 100% see, to be honest. That does make a lot of sense. So it might actually have nothing to do with trying to make another Salt on the Wound character, and might literally just be, we need another Inazuma character so that we can build up an Inazuma Chronicled Wish. That could be the case. That's absolutely realistic. And then the C1 thing, the C1 plus deal, that could literally just be so that they can retain that feeling of, if I pull them now, that might be more convenient for me later on, which, to be honest, standard characters, they've never really sold that well in the first place. But with that being said, that's the only real reason that I can think of as to why somebody would want to use their limited currency on a standard character's limited time banner. And when you think about it like that, suddenly the character's existence and just sort of the kit design makes a whole lot more sense to me. Doesn't mean that I'm happy with it. It's still garbage, and I still do feel like they went a little bit too far in making her like this. Like, she should at least be a little bit better than Sucrose at C0. It's fine if they want to double down on that later on, but she should be a little bit better than Sucrose. Like, come on. But even so, I do appreciate people pointing that out to me, because now it makes a bit more sense to me as to what they're trying to achieve here. And the nice thing is that at least building up copies does help. It does fix the issue. The thing with Dia on release is that you could pull for Constellations, but even at C6, she still felt underwhelming at the time, and the damage ceiling, the max damage ceiling, was much lower than it is now. We didn't have any Settled Downs, we didn't have any Mualanis or Arlequinos, and she was still deemed as underwhelming. So the very nice thing is that at least with Mizuki, when you do get those extra copies, if you do really like the character and you're patient enough to wait for the anniversaries and such, and get her copies over time, then you do end up with a good Taser Team driver. That is nice. Because even with the other old standards, back when they weren't very good, Constellations couldn't save them. No amount of Constellations could turn Keqing from back then into the Keqing that she is now, the amazing Fischl driver. No amount of Constellations could turn the old Diluc who didn't have Xianyan into the current Diluc that does. So I am at least glad that they gave her good Constellations, and it's very clear to me that Hoyoverse has gotten a lot better at designing Constellations over time. Compare C4s on most modern characters to C4s on most older characters. They used to be so random sometimes. Yes, I love 100% extra death from Xiao C4. That one's always gonna be really funny to me. I really don't understand what the thought process was behind that, but it's hilarious to me even to this day. But yes, I would say it's fair to say that Mizuki really starts to be a character from C1+. But to be honest with you, I still don't really think that being standard means that you should be a bad unit. Because while I understand that every standard unit has gotten better over time, and they sort of came into form over time, every single standard now, barring Chi-Chi and perhaps Mona, is really solid. Like, they're all at least, at minimum, B tier, and I would say at best A tier. That's pretty good. And the standards for characters in general have improved a lot over time. Every single limited 5-star that Genshin comes out with these days is really good. And I understand that we can't really apply that to Mizuki because she is a standard, she is destined to be of lower value, that's fine, I accept that. There's still a heightened standard. She should at least be as good as Tainari was for his own niche, if you know what I mean. So while I'm glad that getting Constellations does alleviate all of this, and that you'll be fine if you just can get some extra copies over time, I do not think that being standard necessarily equates to being horrible. Because Keqing is decent, Jean is really good, Tainari is really good, we get the drill at this stage. Diluc plus Xianyan, very competent. A quick tip for anybody that wants Mizuki but doesn't really want to spend Primo Gems on her, save all of your blue standard wishes until patch 5.5 because she isn't going to be appearing on the standard banner until that patch. So from 5.5 onwards, you're going to have a chance to get her on the standard banner, so just thought I would throw that in there. I don't think Mizuki being standard gives her an excuse to be in the state that she's in right now. A lot of people said to me that her being standard is why she can't be broken. I'm not asking for a broken character on standard, I'm asking for one that's at least decent and functions well within her niche. She ticks neither of those boxes down at C0, Every standard at least feels usable at C0. What is Mizuki's excuse? She can be worse than your average limited, that's fine, but if you're equal to Sayu in terms of overall character value, then we're gonna have problems. This is on-release Dia levels of bad. But what do you think? Is Mizuki being garbage justified by her being a standard, or should she have been better? Let me know down below, I'd love to hear your thoughts. As always, I have a ZZZ second channel. Head on over and subscribe if you're interested in some fun, silly ZZZ content. I'd also like to mention that I stream on Twitch. I stream once a week, every week on Saturdays, starting from 3 PM UK time. Come along so that we can play Wuthering Waves, ZZZ, and do some other fun stuff together. Hopefully this video was able to tell you why I think that being standard isn't a good excuse to be bad. This has been Juice, signing out, and the best thing about Mizuki, honestly, it's her little creatures.